Pop culture's idea of the samurai is of an honorable warrior, a skilled swordsman that defeats its enemies in single combat. In my homebrew setting of Oriental Bulk, this is also the case. Sometimes. Today we're going to be talking about the typical idea of the samurai, because the samurai of Kish are very unique in how they bring their enemies down. The katana is still tied to the soul of the warrior, but these days they have transitioned into more bombastic means to bring their enemies low. This is the Kishian samurai. He is trained with his blade, but his primary weapon is the arquebus. He is trained to fire quickly and accurately when in fixed formation, or from atop a very big, very bulky ship. He forms the elite force that keeps the Tetzuan Shogunate alive and prosperous. And today we are going to be discussing exactly how that happens. Hello everyone, this is DM Gideon and this is my first video. Today we will be talking about one of the nations in my homebrew setting, the Tetzuan Shogunate, specifically of the culture around its capital of Kish. We will be talking about how this nation projects naval power in the region, how it handles internal issues, and the sacrifices it must make to maintain its various armed forces. That being said, welcome to the Tetzuan Shogunate. First, let's cover the basics. Like the others, the Tetzuan Shogunate was created by mandate of the Divine Emperor of Shenhuang, which is an important figure we will be covering in another video. What matters now is that the Divine Emperor sought to control the lands that will become the shogunate, but not directly. After failing to move its bureaucrats to control the unruly region, he instead chose to send lesser servants to ensure that someone will manage the extraction of mineral resources in the region. So rich is the region that to this day, the extraction of minerals has not stopped, but it never took off like it could. Unlike the other shogunates, the Tetzuan Shogunate never did really control its territory, not even a majority of it. There is a single road that goes across of it, and most villages answer to their own chieftains. We will talk about them in more detail in a later video, but today they matter because they give Kish no end of troubles. This little corner in the top right is actually under control of the shoguns of Kish. The Tetzuan Shogunate may be one state in paper, but it has never been unified under a single ruler, and the two established cultural identities of the shogunate are under constant conflict. This is the city of Kish, the reason why Kishian culture is named as such. This was where the servants of the Divine Emperor made landing thousands of years ago. Originally a few dragonborn from the Heavenly Court and core from the Shinsei Shogunate. Humans will join later and largely integrate into Kishian culture, but they will enter into the lower parts of the social. Tritons from the Shaboluk Shogunate down south have also made this port city their home and taken part into the lowest echelons of the ruling class. You also have some strangers from far-flung lands that have made an enclave in the city from where they trade exotic wares. It is thanks to this cultural heritage that Kishian culture worships two different pantheons. The Moon Pantheon, brought over by the core from the Shinsei Shogunate, and the ancestor worship that the humans brought over from the Divine Empire. Both are recognized religions by the state and by the priesthood. The city was founded to solve the logistics problem that the Divine Empire had, namely, how to transport so much mineral wealth through lands they did not actually control. Several attempts will be made to control the highlands by the Tetsuan shoguns, none of which ever succeeded, but the strategic location of the Bay of Kish turned it into a trade hub and a naval power. The deep harbors of Kish can house hundreds of vessels, and it sits in a highly trafficked sea lane, and the shipyards of Kish are always making ships for war. The city has around 12,000 inhabitants, the majority of them human. Rice and fish are the primary sources of food, but since the city is surrounded by forested mountains, most of it has to be imported from the rest of the shogunate, much like the other shogunates. Once the Divine Emperor of Shenhuang disappeared in the blink of an eye, the shogun of Kish declared independence and fought for it in the several wars that ensued. Time and time again, the might of Kish has been tested. and the little city-state cosplaying as a country has come up on top. Here is a pyramid representing Kishian society. On top of it all, there is a shogun, the military ruler originally assigned by the divine emperor. Ever since those days, the shogun has been from the Tetzuan dynasty, although some rebellions got close to changing it. Right below the shogun, you have the daimyos, the nobility of the warrior class. They have their own lands and retinues of samurai, but answer to the supreme authority of the shogun. Clans can rise and fall from power, but it is rare to see them be completely eradicated. And some clans can date their origin from the original settlers of Kish. Clan Heishi, for example, has been always the biggest naval power, owning the fleet of Kish. Meanwhile, Clan Kaguya is one of the few that can still make weapons from heaven-fell steel. And since swords are still held highly in the warrior ethos of Kish, they have never fallen from their graces. Below the warrior class, we have the religious one. Kishian priesthood of the Moon Pantheon is made entirely of women, and the ancestor worship is more of a disorganized cult, so there is no dedicated clergy. The monk orders are a bit of an oddity, and this is where the cracks in Kishian society begin to show. They are a paramilitary force mostly made up of humans, who in theory answer to the shogun, but in reality answer to themselves. Legally speaking, they can only live off donations, either from the people or the samurai clans, but they can carry weapons and are often more popular than the shogun's armies. The ashigaru class is the soldier class. They are commoners, but they are the upper class of commoners. They train and fight alongside samurai and often die so that the samurai may live. They are the backbone of the Kishian army, something which we will delve even deeper later down the line. The craftsmen, common peasants, and merchants lie below them in that order, with merchants being somewhat distrusted and restricted despite Kish being a trade hub. All of these are considered common people and owe obedience and taxes to the shogun, with the exchange being safety, prosperity, and no obligation to serve in wars. At the bottom of society lie the Highlander prisoners. And this is a bit of mental gymnastics Kishian society does. In Tetzuan Shogunate, slavery is illegal and heavily criminalized. Trafficking slaves will see the enslaved people freed and the slaver executed. Highlanders, however, are a bit of an exception. They are called prisoners and made to do hard labor, so they are effectively treated as slaves but not recognized as such. Kishian society is as rigid as it gets, with very few rare exceptions. You are born into one social class and you will die in it. Law and order are the priority, but the samurai class often gets a final say in this matter. Unless the shogun steps in, justice is what the samurai decide. Meanwhile, the monk orders are allowed to have weapons, are technically below said samurai, and are culturally held to the same level as samurai. And lastly, the samurai clans may make oaths of loyalty to the shoguns, but the samurai are loyal to the clan, not to the shogun. There have been many civil wars that prove how important that difference is. And now, let's go on to the naval question. Because Kish is a naval power in the region, despite being mostly just a big port city. They extract tariffs from passing vessels, forbid certain types of fishing in a large area around their ports, and threaten the trade of their bigger neighbors. How exactly can they pull this off? Well, the answer is in their shipyards, because Kish makes large ships and maintains a small fleet. And those with knowledge of naval force protection will immediately see the issues in trying to patrol a large ocean with a small fleet of slow, hulking ships. And that's the secret. Kish has hulking ships, but they are not slow. Not at all. But what do I mean by that? To begin with, the main force of the Kishian navy is housed at Clan Heishi's docks. 8 atakebune ships constantly on high readiness, with 2 being made and 2 on the way to be decommissioned or sold to the highest bidder. There are lots of pirates that have made themselves owners of an old Kishian ship. These atakebune are heavily armed, more so than any ships of their neighbors. Each one of these carries 6 large cannons, 12 man-portable heavy weapons, and a complement of 150 arquebusiers, 50 of them being highly skilled samurai. Each ship punches well above their already heavy weight class, and the disparity only grows when we look on the heavy firearms. This is the Hyazutsu. It is a firearm made to fire an incendiary rocket which can very quickly set parts of a ship on fire, namely their sails, rigging, or, God forbid, the powder keg. They can shoot roughly as far as an arquebus, and if the enemy crew is not fast at putting fires, they are in trouble. If the 6 heavy cannons were not enough, you can kit your ship with the ozutsu. Ozutsu are portable heavy cannons. They shoot a large bullet over a large distance, which can punch a hole into most ships and do all kinds of damage to them. Since you can move these around the ship and aim them more than you could the cannon, they are the flexible heavy hitters of the ship. And if for some reason 150 arquebusiers were not enough, you can decide to pick 12 kenpatsus as your heavy firearms. The Kishian kenpatsu is effectively a 12-barreled arquebus. It is heavy and requires 2 people to reload it, but it fires a group of 12 shots. If an entire contingent of heavy weapons in a ship is made of kenpatsus, that will be as many shots as the entire contingent of arquebusiers. And you can move these heavy weapons around, perfect to clean the enemy's deck out of crew. But all these guns do not solve the main problem. These are big ships. There are very few of them. And in a world where spells such as Fireball exist, these things are a danger. So you may ask yourself, how does the Kishian Navy make this strategy work? And the reality is that they compensate for their outdated doctrine with superior skill. The Navy crews are professional, with the samurai at the core of each ship. The ships, despite being larger than their adversaries, manage to move faster during battle and during travel. And when it comes to battle, thanks to what we have reviewed, the Kishian Navy excels at superior and precise firepower. These 8 ships can outshoot most things out of the water, and they often fight as a united force. To achieve that superior mobility, Kish employs its sea power. And I'm not talking about shipyards. You see, while other nations put their mages to predict the weather and cast blasting spells, the Kishian wizards and druids have grown the local fauna to be fond of them. So fond of them that eventually they could be trained and enrolled into service. The Bay of Kish is a protected ground for whales, orcas, dolphins, and sharks. This has a steep economic cost for the fishing industry, but in exchange, Kish obtains a military capacity that is hard to replicate. Let's go into details about it. First, we got the whales. Whales are the big mass movers. They are the reason why the Kishian fleet gets to move so fast. 8 of these will be assigned to one ship, with 4 pulling at any given time, rotating as they get tired. With this, the otherwise hulking slow ships turn nimble and agile in combat, and fast when they are traveling in open seas. Other nations may try to replicate this, but only the Kishian Navy has adopted the use of so many whales into their service. Replacing the role of picket ships and smaller vessels, the Kishian Navy employs orcas and sharks. Some of these are ridden into battle by Triton samurai, but most of them are herded. They can cause damage to ships and other beasts in the ocean, and are an absolute godsend during peacetime. Because you see, orcas and sharks do not fly the banners of Kish, but they can absolutely cause damage to merchant vessels or even sink a few of them if they are put to the task. And lastly, we have dolphins. Now, I do not recommend that any of you look up the facts about dolphins, but for the sake of today, all we have to know is that they are very smart creatures. Kish keeps a few of them in their retinues, and they are used as long-range recon assets before battles and support during the battle. Dolphins can guide a ship through fog or harsh weather and direct fire towards ships that could otherwise not be seen. Sailors who have fallen into the water can be aided by dolphins, and thus the losses from a battle are minimized. They cover a niche role, one that you can use things such as familiars and summoned animals for, but they expand that capability. To conclude this section, the Kishian Navy is a small professional force built to win decisive battles. Their idea of a perfect engagement is one where they can put their 8 ships in a battle line and blast the enemy away. To cover for their weaknesses, they employ a large amount of animals, capability that can also be used during peacetime in the same way that other nations may use privateers, mercenaries, or pirates. But the navy can only do so much if the enemy attacks from land. And as we have talked about, that is a big concern for Kish. So now we will delve deeper into how Kish organizes its several armies to defend its territory. How do they defend their limited land against numerically superior foe, and how do they handle their societal conflicts that inevitably bleed over to the armed forces? The main struggles of the armies of Kish are demographics, more specifically the Kishian class system. At the top of the system we have the samurai class. This is our core of skilled warriors. They train for their entire lives and can be quickly called into action wherever they are needed. However, they are also the ruling class. And in most societies, the ruling class has objections to unsavory things such as dying, more so when there are a whole lot of lower class people who could be dying first. That role is accomplished by the ashigaru. Ashigaru are professionally trained as well, but far more numerous. They comprise the backbone of the army, the majority of the foot soldiers that Kish can bring to battle. However, these are lower in the class structure, and to keep them from getting any ideas, the samurai make sure that they are less well armed and trained. So the ones that can fight best don't want to risk their necks much, but they also don't want to have the ones who are more available to die to be better at fighting. It sure cannot get any worse, right? Remember the monk orders? Yes, the warrior monk orders. The ones who are nominally under the samurai in the class structure, but culturally held to the same standard? Yes, those guys. In times of war, and even in times of peace, these are the first warriors to go into combat. Monk orders are spread out throughout the Kishian lands, and are ready to fight at a moment's notice. The problem is that they are also very happy to fight the samurai and the shogunate, something which they have done more than in one occasion. To that little problem, we have to add that whilst numerous, the monk orders are spread out in their monasteries, and they have absolutely no unified fighting standard. These are orders of warrior monks, not regimental soldiers. They do not have a unified system of signaling or higher command structure or even a common strategy when it comes to waging war. Below the monk orders, we have the common population, and they are a non-starter. The Kishian social contract demands that the commoners not be called to fight. That only happens in the most dire situations, and even so, there is no such thing as levy training. So even if they were pushed into combat, they will be untrained, barely armed, and completely unarmored mobs. This leaves the majority of the population as an option. And to make matters even more concerning, the Highlander prisoners know that in times of war, the samurai and the ashigaru leave the cities, which means that they have a chance to show them how unhappy they are of their mistreatment. Every time there is a war, and wars are a regular thing in Kish, the Highlander slaves have to be managed as to not risk sabotage or revolt. Now we go back to the world map, precisely to the red line in the top right corner. That is roughly the border between the Kishian dominated lands and the Highlander lands. We will speak about the Highlander warriors in a later episode, but for now, all we have to know is that they outnumber the Kishian armies horrendously so. If the Kishian army were to fight even a large fraction of the Highlander warriors at once, they will be crushed by sheer weight of numbers. Thankfully for the Kishians, the Highlander tribes fight each other as often as they try to raid Kishian lands. Still, yearly raids are expected after harvest season, and there is no telling when and where will each strike land, nor the force of the invading enemy. And to make matters even worse, as you can see, the Kishian armies have little territory to work with. They cannot give themselves the benefit of retreating all that much before they are overrun, which is why the Kishian army mobilizes in a tiered system. Whenever the fighting starts, the first one to respond are the mountain cavalry clans. These are a few samurai clans near the border, and they specialize in riding giant goat cavalry. Their role at this stage is to provide early warning and to assess the danger of the enemy. Meanwhile, the monk orders mobilize as quickly but do the opposite. They hunker down in their monastery or help evacuate villages or ambush marching highlanders. Anything to delay their advance and shape the movement away from the villages and into the desired paths. At this stage, there's also the chance for the navy to provide fire support on the shore, but their main role is to transport troops wherever they are needed. The role of the main army, that being the samurai and ashigaru force, is to form a large army, a large formation, and meet in battle the largest group of highlanders. The doctrine of battle of the Kishian army is of decisive. Their idea is to eliminate or rout the largest enemy formation of battlefield, then chase it back to its lands. During times of peace, this exercise is done at a smaller scale, with maybe one samurai clan or 2 monk orders, and a smaller army marching into Highlander lands to weaken any threatening Highlander warlord. At every step of this process, the loss of resources is preferred over casualties, since men are harder to replace. This is a system that needs to work not just win a few battles at unsustainable costs. And now that we have explained how the Kishian army mobilizes, we will go into detail as how to fight their battles. The process follows the same steps as in mobilization. The goat cavalry clans engage the enemy in skirmishes, luring Highlander warlands away from settlements and into the desired zones. The monk orders do the exact opposite. They hunker down in their monasteries or defend villages to steer warbands away from. If needed, towns are evacuated and Kishian territory is ceded, but at this stage, pitched battles are to be avoided. In the main army, the samurai troops are the first to mobilize, but the ashigaru forces then build around them. At this stage, the army commander will pick a ground of its choosing and fortify it, or advance to a selected battleground. Picking the battleground is vital for the Kishian army due to their way of fighting. Once the battle starts, there will be little changes to the plan, so the battlefield has to give them as much as an advantage as possible. Locations like elevated hills with open ground in front, or mountain passages where the Highlanders cannot bring their superior numbers to bear. At this stage, the monks and cavalry assume the role of advanced scouts and rear guard, something that is vital to avoid ambushes, which we will talk about more in the Highlander video. Then comes the day of the battle. Either by outmarching the enemy or by luring it into the position, a single decisive battle is the preferred outcome. The ashigaru form with solid pike lines at the front, supported by bowmen and gunmen, all of them surrounding the samurai gunners and their artillery. The monk orders are then deployed on the flanks of this force, and the cavalry is held back in reserve as a last-ditch resource. And now that all that has been said, it is time for the Kishian army's strengths to shine, namely achieving victory through a rigid mindset but superior skill. Let me explain. The ashigaru are the backbone of the army. Their role is to take the biggest hits from the enemy and stop its advance. For that purpose, solid formations of pikes are arranged at the front. Behind them, the bow and teppo ashigaru fire from fixed positions, usually behind large fixed shields. This is a very strong defensive line, but also very unwieldy. The ashigaru are trained to move as fixed blocks and can do some limited maneuvers, but they are at the strongest when they spend the entire battle in the same position where they started. The samurai act as the precision tool of the army. From their position in the center, they can be supported by the few spellcasters the army has and use their superior precision and fire rate to annihilate the strongest element of the enemy. Think of a warlord's elite unit, a giant oni or a group of shamans flinging spells at you. They are kept in the center of the army lines to be as safe as possible from harm, and only sent into the melee to deliver the final blow to a wavering enemy, or when the situation is truly desperate. For this role, the samurai have also started employing warhounds. They are not equal to a samurai in battle, but losing 100 of these trained dogs is preferable to the samurai losing a single one of their own. And now onto the monks. The monks are the glue of the Kishian battle line. They are the warriors that train their entire lives for these moments. Their dedication is even greater than the samurai. The samurai will reluctantly withdraw to live another day rather than risk their lives. The average monk will fight to the last one of them if it means achieving victory. However, they are organized only in small units, and their cohesion with other parts of the army is almost non-existent. Putting them on the front line will just disrupt the rigid way that Kish prefers to fight. Instead, they are sent to plug the gaps in the formation, uneven terrain that pike formations cannot cover, or sections of the line that are about to be overrun by the enemy. You can rely on the monks of Kish to fight hard enough for the situation to be stabilized, or at least to buy time for the artillery and guns of Kish to weaken the enemy assault. They are the very little flexibility that the Kishian army gets, and many times they have been the sole reason why victory was grasped from the jaws of defeat. In short, the Kishian army is a highly trained force, but separated in tiers of training. The leadership is very organized until it isn't. It mobilizes in different timelines and focuses on eliminating the enemy in a single fell swoop. This force can and frequently has defeated enemies much bigger than them, but is not an invincible model. The Kishian army suffers from any attrition. It can hardly regenerate its forces as quickly as it would like, so it has to make sacrifices everywhere for it. And those sacrifices have to be measured, because Kish has little ground to see to the enemy before the army is fighting at the gates of the capital. To wrap it all up, Kishian society is shaped by its strategic environment and political classes. The ruling samurai base their legitimacy in its martial superiority, so they must constantly deliver on that whilst surrounded by enemies. Certain economic opportunities, such as fishing large animals near the Bay of Kish, are sacrificed in order to provide an edge to the Kishian navy, which itself holds a key strait and sea lane of the continent. Kish is a state riddled with internal pressures which are constantly on the verge of escalating, but also external forces that force cooperation between all the involved parties. So far, they have survived 1 millennia of small war with the Highlanders and 3 centuries of independence. Only time will tell for how long this holds. This has been my first video on my homebrew setting, the Tetzuan Shogunate Part 1, Kish. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I will see you in the next video. Goodbye.